So in the last video we had all these different kinds of species. We have keystone species and indicator species, foundation species, native species, non-native species. But they don't exist in their own little bubble. They all exist in the same areas, and so they have interactions between those species. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those interactions. This first case study looks back at our indicator species. Looking at frogs in particular, we said that birds are good indicator species, fish are good indicator species. Amphibians are especially good because they can tell us about things that are happening both on land and on water, because part of their life cycle is in the water, where their eggs are, when they lay their eggs and when they go through this first part of their life cycle, when we become tadpoles and before they become frogs. And then once they come out on land, now they're exposed to both land and water because they have to keep their skin moist, so they rely on water. So if there's contamination in the water supply, we know about it. But they also absorb oxygen through their skin as well as through their lungs. And so they're good indicators of what's happening on land as well. So when we look at some of the things that are impacting our amphibians, remember, it's never going to be just one problem. It's really infrequent that we can point at one specific thing and say, this is why species are declining. So in this case for amphibians, one of the things is the loss of habitat. So as we start to build more houses and we pave over things and we take away some of these watering areas, and we break up their habitat, which is what fragmentation is, we start to see a decline in species. And that's not just amphibians. Prolonged drought will impact amphibian species because, like we said, they need to keep moist. And so if they don't have the ability to keep their skin wet, then they're going to die. And so prolonged drought decreases the amount of water supplies that are available to them. Pollution both in the water and in the air will both impact our frogs once again for that same reason, because part of their life cycle they spend in the water and part on land, and so they're susceptible to lots of different kinds of pollution, in addition to things that are like spilled directly on the ground. As the increase in ultraviolet radiation happens, if there's a thinning of the ozone layer, amphibians don't have very thick skin, if you will. So they're not very well protected from UV light. Increasing numbers of parasites, viral disease, fungal diseases. Some of that happens because of other introduced species. Some of it's because things that we're doing, if we're dumping sewage or something like that, that can increase the growth of bacteria and parasites and things like that. In some areas of the world, the amphibians are hunted, and so that's a thing. They could be hunted either for food or for sale as an exotic pet, that kind of thing. And then once again, we have our non-native. So not only can our non-native species bring in diseases that our amphibians are not immune to, but they could also be eating them. So obviously that would be a problem. Or they could be out competing them, eating the same insects that they do, having the same niche, basically that same way of life. Maybe they mate in the same areas, or they inhabit their habitats in the same areas. They're taking up that same spot, then they could outcompete the native species. So a lot of times species look for ways to avoid that competition. So obviously they don't want to get eaten. So there's the competition for resources, which is what we were just talking about. When two species occupy the same niche, how do they divide it up, or how do they try to avoid the other species so that way that everybody gets what they need? And obviously, once again, they want to avoid predation or getting eaten. So there's different ways that they can interact through competition. They have predation, which we'll talk about, which there's a clear winner and loser. Parasitism, still a pretty good winner and loser in that one. And then you get into mutualism and commensalism, where there's a bit more mutual gain involved in these ones. So we have some species that they have these adaptations, so they are reducing that competition because they only use part of the resource. And that's what resource partitioning is. And this is an example of that. So we've got these different kinds of birds that might all live in the same tree, but because of what they eat, either different types of insects or different kinds of nuts or berries or something like that off of the tree, then they can actually all live in the same tree but not compete for resources. And so the very famous Charles Darwin experiment about the Galapagos finches and their different types of beaks and their different beak shape was an example of this as well. They're partitioning their resource because some of them had specialized beaks so they could crack open nuts, and some of them were for getting nectar, and some of them were for digging insects out of the sand and different things like that, so they can partition out their resource. So it allows then for, instead of having this overlap in here, where we'd have competition occurring, we remove that competition by partitioning the resource, by eating different things. And this happens over time. Once again, the bird doesn't just decide, hey, I'm going to eat a different kind of bug. But they might, over time, see that I can't get to the bugs up there, but there's bugs down here, and so they start going down to that area where they see something that they can eat. So maybe it wasn't something that they initially liked, but they can still eat, survive on it, and so the partitioning happened over time. None of this, once again, is an immediate thing. Changes in ecosystems, with the exception of like the dramatic, there was a spill, there was a forest cut down, there was a forest fire. Those kind of things are very immediate and catastrophic, but most change that's left to happen on its own takes time for it to occur. So some other kinds, so that's partitioning and trying to reduce the amount of competition. But we have some other different examples of some species interactions. One of them is predation. And so you have the predator who tries to get bigger, faster, stronger so they can get more prey, or to have some techniques to outsmart their prey. And then you have the prey that's trying to not get eaten. And so there's a couple of videos after this one. The one is about the antlion, which I just think is super cool. Yes, that's a real name of it's an insect. The video is kind of funny because it's a National Geographic thing and they like try to make it all dramatic and they have like lions roaring and stuff when it's really this teeny little bug. But it is native to Africa, but they are antlions here. So if you look in the fine dust around the bases of bushes and things like that and you see a little cone-shaped depression, there's usually an antlion in that area. So they're really cool, and the video will explain to you what antlions do. The snake caterpillar, one of my favorites also. This is a snakehead caterpillar, and there's a video of him in there as well, and you can actually see him all puffed up. So this is the tail end of the caterpillar, this is the front of the caterpillar, and he actually like gets to be like over twice his size, and the back end of him looks like a snake. Now the really cool part about this is not only did he make himself look bigger to hopefully scare off the bird or whatever it was that was trying to eat him, but if you know anything about snakes, I want you to look at the shape of the head of the snake. So here in the desert, if you grew up here, hopefully you learned that diamond shape or triangle shape means trouble. So that means that they're poisonous. And so you can see how the snake caterpillar not only is it mimicking a snake, but it's mimicking a poisonous snake. So if the head is rounded more and looks more oval shaped, then it's not a poisonous snake. So you'll get like your gardener snakes and things like that, and they would be more rounded, so they wouldn't have these protrusions coming out the side. But your poisonous snakes, like your rattlesnakes, are going to have that diamond-shaped head, which lets us know that they are poisonous. So anyhow, I just think it's kind of cool that evolutionarily speaking, the caterpillar, evolved that way to have that poisonous look to him as well. So the third video that's on there is all about different kinds of camouflage, not just insects, but other organisms as well. Very cool. Some of them, you look at it and you're like, really, where is the bug or something like that. There's one in there of a caterpillar that, like, if they didn't zoom in on it, you'd be like, where's the caterpillar? It's really very cool. Some of them do what's called mimicry, so they make themselves look like something that's poisonous. And so this butterfly right here is mimicking a monarch butterfly, because the monarch butterfly is poisonous to most birds. It has a similar coloring pattern to make it look poisonous, so which is kind of cool. Some of them have things like false eye spots, so it sort of goes along the line of this camouflage, but the eye spots on the back of this moth make it look like a bigger organism. So it's like you're only seeing part of it, and like you're seeing this giant head with these giant eyes on there. The poison dart frogs, so we have some that like have poisons and toxins in their skin. They're usually very brightly colored. They could be yellow, they could be red, um, but they secrete this substance out of their skin that can make you sick. And that's where the natives used to take for their poison arrows. They used to get the secretions from the poison dart frogs. Here in the Southwest are Colorado river toads, which are the giant ones that look like they're like the size of dinner plates, kind of, and they come out during the monsoon when it rains. They also secrete that poison in their skin. So if you have pets, especially your dogs, if you go out at night, sometimes you can see them and you gotta be really careful because dogs can get very sick if they eat them. The bombardier beetle, kind of like our stink bugs, right? They spray a chemical to kind of, it's kind of like a little skunk, to try to chase off their predators. So we have some adaptations by the prey to try to get away from the predator. So parasitism is, I think everybody knows what a parasite is. It's like a tick, right, or lice. It's when the species feeds off of another one. It can be an external parasite, like the lice or ticks. It can be an internal parasite, like tapeworms. It can also be something like, there's this worm called a Dracula worm, which is it's kind of a nasty little bugger. The eggs are put into waterways, so they're in the kind of contaminated waterways, and then they usually come in through an open sore or through the foot of a person, and they kind of work their way up inside of them along to the inside of the thigh. Um, and then they kind of make a sore on the inside of the thigh. And then when they get near water, the little worm sticks its head out of the person's leg so that it can lay eggs in the water and make more. So kind of some nasty little things that can be parasites. I'm sure you've all heard the stories about tapeworms that are the size and length of someone's intestines. Parasites are usually segmented, the internal parasites like that are usually segmented worms, and so if you try to pull it out, it'll actually pull apart, and each little segment will make a new worm. So if they find tapeworms like that, they usually have to try to kill them with some kind of medicine or something like that. So kind of yucky, but lampreys are an example of a non-human parasite. So they attach themselves onto a shark, and they will feed off of the shark or the whale or something like that. They'll feed off the blood of them. So mutualism is a mutually beneficial arrangement. So something like oxpeckers and crows, which we'll show you the example of here in just a second. But this is one that it's good for everyone. And then there's commensalism, which is usually good for one species, doesn't really impact the other species, so it's not really hurting anything. Sometimes it can be like a living off of, but not actually doing harm. So just talked about some parasites on here, so if you need to take some things in your notes, you can pause for a second. This last one, actually, we didn't talk about this one. Cowbirds and starlings are like this too. So some birds, they consider them a parasite because the cowbirds will put their eggs into somebody else's nest. And then the cowbird is much bigger than usually than the bird that they're putting it into, their eggs into their nest. And so the cowbird will actually like kick out the other birds and they'll die, and the mom will still feed the cowbird. So that's considered a parasite as well. So some examples of mutualism. So here's our oxpecker with a rhino. So the oxpeckers are picking the ticks off the rhinos, fleas and things like that. So the oxpeckers are getting food, and the rhinos are getting cleaned off of parasites. So good for everybody. We have the clownfish and the sea anemone. So the clownfish is immune to the stings of the sea anemone, and so the clownfish moves in between the tentacles and will pick out debris and things like that. It'll eat little bits and pieces of stuff that fall in, so the anemone gets cleaned out. The clownfish gets food and protection because other fish will get stung by the sea anemone. In this example, we have juniper, which is what grows here a lot. So one of the things about junipers is that they cannot fix their own nitrogen. So most plants can't. We already did a little thing about nutrient cycling, right? And we know that nitrogen, while it's a necessary thing for plants to grow, plants can't take it in through their stomata and utilize it. It has to be fixed in the ground for them. And so this mycorrhizal fungi lives in the soil, and it basically attaches onto the root nodules, and it fixes the nitrogen. So the plant gets nitrogen, and the fungi gets a place to live. So it's habitat for it. And you can see that it increases plant growth. So this is an example of with the mycorrhizal fungi and without it. So nitrogen, once again, is that really important nutrient for plant growth. The last one is commensalism. So this is a bromeliad, the flower that we see these a lot. They're potted plants, things like that. But in the rainforest, they actually live on the side of the tree. So it's different than here in the southwestern United States, where we have mistletoe, which most people think, oh, mistletoe, it's Christmas, you kiss under the mistletoe. Well, mistletoe is actually a parasite. It puts its root system down into the tree itself, and it actually pulls out nutrients from the tree. Bromeliads don't do that. They anchor into the tree, but they actually gain all their sustenance through the water and through photosynthesis. They actually aren't pulling anything out of the tree itself. So in this case, it has a little bit of an impact because they are putting their roots inside of them, but they're not actually pulling anything out of the tree. They're just anchoring on to them there.